All right, we're officially live streaming here at Red or Green Books. The word is right, and Red or Green Films for American Graveyard Podcast Live. This is our January 2025 podcast live show. It is January 4th, 2025. I'm your host, Marissa Prada, also the founder of Red or Green Books. I am joined with my esteemed guests and colleagues, Rick Spisak, Elizabeth Wolf, Blitz the poet, and of course, James, Mr. Speaker Sears, are with us. We're hoping Henry L. Jones is able to join us. We will see. If not, that is okay. He can always catch us on the next podcast. All right, some housekeeping things today. Remember, we are live streaming. If you do not want to be recorded today, please keep your camera off and yourself muted. But hopefully all the contributors today are here to not do that. But if you're a guest in the room, please understand we are live streaming. This is not a town hall meeting. So this is not where anyone gets to come in the room and just start yapping. This is not a yap session. This is a registered pre-sign up a podcast. You are welcome to sign up for the podcast. Anyone who is watching, listening, or viewing this back, reach out to us, please, at americangraveyardpurpose@gmail.com. All right. So our mission statement is American Graveyard Podcast Live is an international collection of artists who come together in a unified global call for an end to gun violence. Each month, we will cover a different topic centered around gun violence. The podcast is composed of facts, opinions, personal stories, local and global news and events, historical information, and other such matters. We will list where information was obtained and do our best to ensure the citations are from reputable and true sources. This is a free speech, not a hate speech zone. Our disclaimer is that this podcast will discuss topics that may be graphic in nature and are unacceptable for some audiences, especially children. The discussions may include firsthand accounts, videos, audios, photographs, articles centered around gun violence. The opinions and viewpoints expressed during the show are not necessarily the opinions and viewpoints of every host, guest host, special guest, Red or Green Books, or The Word is Right. Viewer listener discretion is advised. All right, let's go. For those of you who do not know yet, and I'm sorry this chair just keeps like pushing me down. It by the end of it, I'm like at the bottom of the screen. For those of you who do not know, Red or Green Books was founded here in Albuquerque, New Mexico during COVID-19. We have almost published 800,000 words. We're very excited on our journey to 1 million words being published. You can find us at redorgreenbooks.com, Red, R-E-A-D. The Word is Right is our online performing arts platform. You can find us everywhere on social media. The Word is Right, W-R-I-T-E. We have shows and hosts there almost every day of the week. We do have spots open if anyone is interested in hosting a show there. Let's see. We are a female forward press. We focus on publishing the majority of debut authors, women, and the groups of people who have been historically marginalized and stigmatized. So we love to work on social justice issues, and gun violence became one of those that we began to embrace after Uvalde. We turned American Graveyard, and a big shout out to Alexis Garcia for the title. She submitted a poem to the anthology titled American Graveyard, and I asked her if we could do her title of the poem for the title of the book. She said yes, so it's become this whole huge movement. So Vexlex, Alexis Garcia, thank you so much for the title and the namesake of this entire movement. We have a 200-page literary anthology and a 50-page full-color art book available on the website. We also have Sponsor a Senator for $15 US. You can go online. You can even pick the state that you want on our website. You can purchase a book. We will anonymously send it to a U.S. state senator of your choice. So please help us do that. Our goal being that every single U.S. state senator has a copy of this book. It is an incredibly moving program and project that we've been doing the last couple of years. We do have a call for volume 2 out right now. You can send up to 3 original unpublished works of literature. They can be essays, short stories, poems, haiku, whatever you like. Again, there is no length restriction, but longer submissions may not be accepted. Please keep that in mind. You may also send up to 3 unpublished original black and white images, 300 DPI or greater, to americangraveyardpurpose@gmail.com. The extension for that is January 15th. 2025. So you've got 11 days if you want to submit. All right, let's go today. This is a no hate speech zone. Please treat everybody with respect. The chat is there for you to use but not abuse. So please do not send any threatening chats to anyone. You will be kicked out and not allowed back in. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and make, let's see, I'm gonna make Mr. Speaker a co-host as well, so he can have all the permissions that everyone else has. Blitz, if you're going to be contributing today, just let me know, and I'm happy to do that for you. All right, last month we talked about surviving the holidays, mental health and suicide. That was a huge deal. Literally a week or so after, well, not even, this was like the 23rd of December. One of my best friends called me to tell me that her brother-in-law had killed himself with a gun. And it was right before Christmas, and the parents found him. And I think he's in his like 20s, mid 20s. So it is imperative that we continue discussing this. It is imperative that we continue this journey because it is not stopping. And the next people, the next family who has to survive these things is going to need somewhere to go, to talk about it, to get support, to get help, to move through their grief. And then we also had our December podcast, literally days, I think maybe a day after the CEO of the healthcare organization was assassinated in New York City with a ghost gun that was 3D printed. And then, of course, now we have our January podcast days, literally days after two home terroristic actions that happened here in the US. The American soldier who drove a truck into Bourbon Street and killed 15 people, and then got in a shootout with police and then was shot and killed. At the same time, another American soldier, highly decorated, decided to shoot himself and detonate explosive fireworks in front of a hotel in Las Vegas. So these, it's just, I think we're doing the right thing by doing this podcast. I think we're doing the right thing by continuing to discuss this because it's not stopping. So I thank you all for being here today as we discuss this month's topic, which is resolutions and grieving gun violence. It always seems like a poignant time to grieve. Everyone seems to always be grieving, and now a lot of it is centered around gun violence. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome my guest host today and share. I'm going to open with a quick 1-minute clip of a YouTube news report with a therapist who is discussing grieving gun violence in children. And then we'll have everyone kind of share a little bit about their stories. If they want to share poems today, we can do that. I know Elizabeth has a wonderful PowerPoint presentation that she has brought as well for those of you who like to see numbers and statistics and facts. So we'll be bringing those to the show today too. All right, so without further ado, we welcome Rick Spisak, Elizabeth Wolf, Blitz the Poet, and James, Mr. Speaker Series. I'll go ahead and have Rick go ahead and introduce himself first, and then Elizabeth and Mr. Speaker and Blitz, and then we'll go into that news clip. You're muted, Rick.
Thank you so much. Marissa, it's an honor to be here with you and with these other peaceful people, raising the issue and discussing ramifications of the proliferation of guns. Many people have said over the years, there's only one purpose for these assault weapons. There's only one purpose for these machine guns. And of course, with the advent of plastic guns and 3D printing, the world's only gotten more dangerous. That people are more concerned about books in schools rather than guns in schools. is horrific and is sign of a kind of very special blindness and stupidity that marks our culture as not really fully civilized. I was going to tell you a quick story. A friend of mine, a martial arts expert who lives on the islands, was concerned because a neighbor of his was starting fires, firing weapons at people, and he called the local police officers and they said, "Well, if this person troubles you, why don't you get a gun and shoot her?" And he said, "Wait a minute, you're the police. Why would you advise me to get a gun and shoot this person?" And they said, "Well, we think that's the best solution to the problem." And he said, "Wait a minute. What would happen if I shot this person because they were shooting at me and tried to start a fire at my house?" And they said, "Oh, you'd be arrested. You'd be charged with murder." He said, "Okay, now how does that help? In what way does that provide a sensible, obvious solution to clearly a person who is in mental disorder?" And they said, "Well, it really doesn't solve the problem, but it just makes it easy for us to deal with." So he was quite puzzled by this kind of suggestion from the police officers. I happen to be the son of a suicide. Uh, Guns were around our house all the time. My father was a peace officer for a while, an industrial officer for a while. And I was always concerned. And unfortunately, depression, economic problems took him to a place where he decided that was his best choice. And he went to the trouble of going to a funeral home, providing services, arranging and purchasing services that he could be dealt with, and then committed suicide in their parking lot. Sad, sad. Let me read this little poem for you. I'd like to think that it raises the issue in a thoughtful way. It's called Today's Multiple Shooting. You can pick the day, obviously. We aim to score higher, so there'll be no one denier. Schools, malls, hospital zones, no longer are we content to leave it at home. I've got more sheltering shells than a sweltering peanut grower tells. This hyper-toxic, meteoric media talking, chalking, shocking, high-tech people mower stalking, walking faster or even slower. On the way to make my score, I got pulled over. The friendly cop at door asked me if I was headed out for some exotic toxic fun. With 45 pistols, automatic rifles, and a 100-round cartridge found, he knew what must be done. We're number one with a bullet, my little pullet with my gun. And when I opened the door, my 50 cal dropped to the floor, kicked on and cut a bus in half. My new cop buddy and I, gosh, we had a hearty laugh. It's got so competitive, like a bunch of jumping adjectives, 10 or 20 like I hardly didn't have any, 40 or 50, now shoot, let's not be thrifty to put I got on time, as if that was a crime. 60 or 70, you think that'd be plenty, but 90 or 100, now for sure that number isn't irrelevant. Going out in a blaze of glory, sure I'm a son of a bitch, but that's my story. What's in it for me beyond the beautiful glory? Oh, say, can you see, I ain't no senator's son, but with my talented palliative bullets, I can pull it out and still be number one. The coppers was all waiting outside. They all feared if they entered, they might catch a part of that long, dark ride. They'd later confide to the news all the ways they sought to confuse. Wasn't it they were recently trained, oh, so well in SWAT? Well, guess my brother, they guess must have forgot. And he was stunning, they said, dressed all in black from his heel to his head. And when he drew his laser bead and began his attack, you could hear him scream, you could hear the flak, almost obscene. With his sails off the rails, off the rack, so many sails. He also had in control a whole fleet of drones. He trained them at his home for just such a minute he wanted to win him. And when he launched a battle, he had them flying. That's the tie-in. He held them at bay with a fleet of robot dogs and got them online so nobody saw. He prearranged an email blast so the local news could carry it live and carry it fast. His future fame would last and last. His exoskeleton armor kept him warm and safe from harm, or he could even under the hail of fire could still make good as escape that liar. And with a Groupon coupon savings, he recorded his gory glory ravings. Yes, he had an AR. Yes, he had grenades. And yes, he trained the local cops at the community arcade. He bought him time with a sublime. He didn't have any, just enough to send him gently. He sent engraved invitation to the local police station. They scoffed and laughed. No one even asked him if it was really true or just a task by half. They'd catch him on the rebound, or perhaps let him leave time to leave him bereave the town with all his robot dogs and his lethal drones to lean on. They decided, and later confided, it was only fair to let him reload, and then he could, take the show on the road.
Oh my gosh, Rick, I love it. Thank you so super much for being here. And I think, like, you can pick the day, obviously. I mean, this is so true. The world that we live in, you can pick the day and just insert it into any poem. I think it has become really quite ridiculous, I think, at this point. And the palliative bullets, I think, is awesome as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for Elizabeth if she would like to introduce a little bit today and tell us perhaps um, what she's going to be doing this show, and then we'll go to Mr. Speaker and Blitz, and then we'll kind of get started with everything.
Okay, I'm Elizabeth Wolf. I'm a poet in Massachusetts. And right now, well, for the past couple of years, I've been working on a book project, Parenting in the Age of Columbine, which opens with the line, "My daughter was born the week of Columbine." So that was true. She was 13 for Sandy Hook. She was 18 and on a gap year during the Parkland shootings. She was 25 and working for an NGO in Ghana for the Uvalde shooting. So this has always been part of our life. And people ask me when she travels the world, do you think she's safe? And I ask them, do you think she's safe here? It's really changed the way we view the space we take in the world. So I like being involved in this project. I think this is the start of the solution, is coming together in a community to see what we can do to work our way from grieving to action to resolution. And I have a poem I was going to read about grieving. Do you want me to read that now or later, Marissa?
It's you feel free to go ahead if you want to read it now. That's fine, since you have the whole spreadsheet to do in a little bit. That's okay.
All right. And, despite the great billing, there's not a whole lot of facts in my spreadsheet. It's more quotes of things that we can do for this topic. But I do have a poem to read. My daughter was a sophomore in high school. One of her very close friends killed himself with a gun suddenly one September afternoon. So this is my poem, the first poem I wrote to Ben, and it's in my book, When Lawyers Wept. This is Goodbye, Ben. There's a tear in the world. Ben has flown free. He put down a bottle. He picked up a gun. In that flash, it was finished. There are no takebacks. There is no next level. For Ben, there is no more pain. There's a Ben-shaped tear in the world. We are all left behind. And we sob. We can't believe, and then we can't think of anything else. We can't eat, we eat junk. We can't sleep, we nap through class. We cling to each other. We all die alone. We forget why we walked into a room. We vow to never forget sweet, awkward Ben. There's a tear in the world. Ben has flown free. We are all left behind. Trauma teachers tell us it will get better with time. Ben is outside of time. We will find a new normal. We will never feel normal again. We mingle in the churchyard, surrounded by sturdy orange pumpkins. I want to smash the smug pumpkins. We tell stories of the bright boy who knew all of the presidents, vice presidents, and major achievements of each administration. Dude could kill a bottle of vodka in 2 days. Of the good friend who always listened and brought bags of candy. Dude, did you see the slices all up his arms? Did the police talk to you? Was he bullied? Dude, remember when he made a Facebook as Eric Harris? He was so talented on the computer with his videos. Dude, did you know he made Columbine mashups? Dubbed over the security footage with soundtrack and screams. It was raw. Dude, it was totally sick. Why didn't anyone see any signs? Wasn't there anything we could have done? We file into pews to pray, to sing hymns, surrounded by pictures of Ben with family and friends, with his date to the homecoming dance, my daughter. When 6 15-year-old boys rise as young men to carry the coffin, through tears I see how their faces will be set years from now when their parents pass or their wives leave or, God forbid, they bury a child. All the losses of their lives will now be measured in magnitudes of Ben. Thank you.
Oh, Elizabeth, thank you for that poem. Yeah, there's a tear in the world. There is a Ben-sized tear in this world. I think that's a wonderful description of what happens when someone dies, especially in a violent way. And it's true, they say time will help, but Ben is outside of time. I think that is very poignant. And the visual of 15-year-old boys rising like men to carry their friend in a box is a startling image. I mean, it's just we don't really think about the effects of gun violence or loss and grief on children as much as we should. And so today, that's why we're going to talk a lot today about grief, how we move through grief, how we help our children move through grief, how we help our friends and loved ones and family members through grief. Mr. Speaker, would you like to introduce yourself? Would you like to chime in as we begin to open the show today?
I just would say hello to everybody. My name is James, Mr. Speaker Sears, soldier. So I am kind of just over the last few actions, I'm just perplexed that people who swore oath to protect and defend take things to another level. It pains me. It pains me because some of these things, America was founded in blood. And thus, many times when these actions happen, it is just the way, the nature of things. What are you reaping what you sowed, and so till we repent for some of the stuff that we've done, it may continue to happen. It's like we have no remorse for the bad things we've done. Now, don't get me wrong, um, we're trying to do better, but our forefathers, they had some issues. So, but I'm just glad to be here. I'm listening, enjoying the show. But my heart is hurting right now based off of just what I see happening and no end to it because our leaders are deaf to it right now. So back to you.
And coming from a military family, I just as soon as I heard what I heard, I was so heartbroken for everyone who is serving active duty or is retired from the military, because I know the oaths that they take and the love they have for this country, and sometimes the brokenness that comes with the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice. And so, my heart goes out to all of you. We have active duty and retired military in this publishing house and in this poetry community. Um, so if you're in crisis, please talk to someone. Dial 988. You matter. It does get better. It can get better. You are not alone, and you matter. And it's really important that we do more, I think, to help those who are truly suffering. And I'm so sorry, Mr. Speaker, for all of that. It's devastating if you're in the military family. It's absolutely devastating to hear what happened this last week. But I'm grateful you're here, so thank you for being here. Blitz, do you want to chime in? Do you want to introduce yourself, where you're from, and all that good stuff as we get going today? Blitz may be on the road too. I know he's driving. He's in Dallas Fort Worth. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see when if he gets back to his phone. All right, so I wanted to just briefly tell you all the layout for the year for 2025, because the events that have happened over the last couple of weeks are really going to shine a light onto the rest of the year's lineup for American
Can you hear
Graveyard
me?
Podcast. Oh, there you are, Blitz. Yes, please go ahead. Introduce yourself, sir.
Okay, my name is Blitz the Poet. I am from, like she said, I am out of Dallas, Fort Worth, and I am very much against gun violence. I understand the point of guns, but that doesn't mean everyone should have them. And like Mr. Speaker was saying moments ago, I mean, right now I am kind of torn with what happened with people who are from our own country. I mean, yes, it was not a gun violence issue, but it was still, they found guns on them, which means they had intent to use them, in my view, along with the slaughtering using a vehicle. So I'm glad that law enforcement was able to stop them before it got out of hand. But I'm just an advocate against violence in all formats. It doesn't always have to be a mass shooting to cause an issue. I mean, because people are using vehicles, but I'm just more or less against violence in all facets. But I will let Marissa continue with the show. I just wanted to at least introduce myself.
He is also the doppelganger for KRS-One. All right. Anyways, so the lineup for this year, and I will say that the guns were used in both of the incidences that happened this previous week. The New Orleans attack, the driver of the truck used a gun on law enforcement, and then unfortunately the person who was inside the vehicle in Las Vegas and outside of the hotel used a gun on himself. So we do know that guns are still being used in these events. And so we're going to keep talking about it. We're not stopping. And the two videos that I have to show you today, especially the one at the end when we close, gives me a lot of hope as an advocate, as steering the ship, that what we're doing is right, that we are not alone. I feel very alone as an advocate sometimes, like the world's not listening, the government's not listening, everyone is for this death, and sometimes I feel very isolated as an advocate, that it's not ever going to get better. And watching the YouTube video that I'm going to show you at the end helped affirm me, so I hope it helps affirm all of you. All right, so this year's lineup, we have This goes from February to December. Calling 911 and meeting Al Sharpton. March is Women and Guns, talking about guns during National Women's Month. April is protecting yourself from gun violence. May is the technology of the trigger. June is responsible gun ownership and education. July is the contagion of inspiration. August is the brutality of protect and serve. September is if guns were cancer in kids. October is guns for entertainment. November is the denial factor. It will never happen to me. And December is spectacular murder. And we learned about spectacular murder from the last podcast, right, Elizabeth? And I think that it's so devastating because what happened in Las Vegas last week was exactly that. The spectacular murder. And so, you know, we'll be discussing more of that towards the end of the year. If you would like to get involved, please reach out to us at americangraveyardpurpose@gmail.com. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play this clip. It's very quick. It's 1 minute 12 seconds. It is from TMJ4 News, which is an NBC affiliate. I will just say that we don't pick clips because they're associated to any news organization. Really, it's just some of the things that speak to us. I wish it kind of would have gone more in detail to what this therapist was talking about, but it gives a few really great ideas. And then we'll go around and we'll talk about, do we have resolutions? How have we experienced grief and how are we moving through grief? And if you're a parent or a grandparent or a child of someone who has experienced the gun violence, how do you protect them? Like, how do you create that environment? Or what were you not given? How did you not have what you needed to feel safe? Like, those things are very important to discuss as we move forward. And every day there are more and more survivors of gun violence. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and then we'll go. Hang on.
Grief of losing a loved one is difficult, but imagine how children are processing the loss of a friend, a family member to gun violence. Well, earlier today, I spoke with psychologist Steve Dykstra, the director of Children's Mobile Crisis Team.
What can we do as the adults in their lives and community members in helping children deal with these traumas?
We have to remember what it is that children need. And we have to make sure that they get it no matter what. I'm not talking about food, shelter, and clothing. I'm not talking in those simple terms. I'm talking about a sense of safety and security. And where do children get that? They get that from the adults who are closest to them, and also from the adults around them and the adults around them, from people who are further and further away, from their whole community. It sounds passé, but from the whole village. And it's really important that we recognize that the way we give them that sense of security is through relationship, through close, reliable, dependable, stable relationships.
Dr. Dykstra also said that we live in communities that are much more harsh than they should be, and children bear the brunt of that.
Yeah, I touched. Okay. It was told to me not too long ago by a friend of mine that children's lives shouldn't matter more than other people's lives when it comes to gun violence. And while I agree in part, right, I don't think anyone's life should weigh more than another person's. Everyone's life is valuable and important. The quality of life, the protection of the children, I think is imperative. And it's the responsibility of the community because they're smaller, they're younger, they're less knowledgeable, they're less able, they're less experienced, and they have less power and accessibility to help themselves. So it is so important, I think, that we consider the children. And one of the things that we'll touch on in the video when we wrap up today is that we all have to come together and find that one thing that we can all agree on. that binds us all together. And I think children can be that. I think that we all want our children to be safe, happy, healthy in this life, right? We all want them to have a good life. We want to protect our kids. And people who don't have kids certainly don't want to see kids suffer. I would hope not anyway, right? And so coming together and discussing gun violence, maybe not from the point of view of guns or your individual personal rights, but perhaps from the standpoint of keeping kids safe. Because if they are not affected necessarily at school, perhaps they lose a loved one to gun violence. And so the effect, the ramifications of children is reverberating exponential generational effect. Personally, I don't have a lot of resolutions for 2025 except to hit 1 million words at Red or Green Books. We're getting ready to file our nonprofit 501c3, and so we're doing all of those things. I would like to have no more bullets come into my house, but of course, those are things that we cannot control. I can only worry about what I can control, and what I can control is continuing to advocate around an end to gun violence. My first book is titled Conversations with Grief. It is the 1 year I wrote poetry after my best friend made the decision to end her life with a gun. And so these are things that we tap into for healing. And so I will go ahead and I'll pass it around the room. And if you would like to discuss, you have any resolutions, what is your experience around grieving gun violence? What have you found that really helps you? And also, maybe we should tap into the things you shouldn't do if you have a loved one suffering or grieving. Sometimes people are overly helpful or underly helpful, or they're just, there are some things that perhaps we shouldn't be doing. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn that over to Rick, and then I have a poem to read, and then we'll turn it over to Elizabeth for her spreadsheet, and then we'll end. Well, we can continue to discuss things after Elizabeth's presentation, and then we'll end today on a YouTube clip. So Rick, I will turn it over to you. You're muted again, my friend.
Thank you so much. As I said, I've had the experience of growing up around guns, and my father made no claims about having guns for pleasure or having guns for hunting. But he had them around my whole life. I was not enthusiastic about it, but didn't really get a vote. And ultimately, he chose when, having had his brothers and sisters pass away from cancer, my mother passed away from cancer, and he got his diagnosis of cancer, and it was going to be a brain cancer. He decided to end his life. And it took some time, but I did finally write about it, and I tried to understand those choices and that point of view. So this is a poem about a suicide. I called it Dad's Farewell. Dad, all of what is left is the laughter. That's all, in fact, that we're really after. He walked into a funeral home to unlock and slowly, slyly added to their rolling stock. He purchased a cupboard he would never see, knowing we would visit a certain potent portion illicit. He stayed and watched her die. He must have, through the long, lonely hours, wondered why. His mom and dad and all those Love Street brothers and sisters that he had once so loved were all severed. Cancer slowly took them each, loaded them out and stole them like a thief, unmade them like a bed unbleached. Cancer, too, would take Joe and Ed. His brother Harry slowly died. Dorothy, Dottie, then he cried. He watched her fade slowly, slowly away to hide. In the final hours, in the home they made, that lonely last parade. Resting, waiting, attended by the nurses, sending as one more. He watched cancer take its course. And then one sunny day, just one more delicious, malicious corpse stole his wife away little by little, right from their silent, quiet middle. Watched her fade, day by day, the slow cost, the loss delayed by months, then weeks, then displayed only days, till only silence, no matter what you say, and although you might even pray. But he purchased the service, stood there, took out his wallet, and was calmly nervous, looked around at the trees and the sky and wondered probably why. He paid the ticket, went out into the parking lot, took out his loaded gun and clicked it. He paid the cost, he bore the loss. He didn't want to be a bother like his wife and brother. Nothing left to chance, no brother, son to glance. He invited death to dance. He took the chance. His skin cancer diagnosis near his eye, he noticed he'd seen a neighbor and friend go through this to the end, the skin, the eye, the brain, the brutal pain. In silence, no warrior's death attained. Then slowly, doctor shrouded, slowly go insane, undoubted, the lights would flicker out. He watched his wife of 40 years fall. He saw his heroic brother, after all those years and tears, crawl, drag around a burden toted. That wasn't him. He chose, full-throated. He would not fade nor waste away. He had a voice. He made his choice, said his farewell, set up his perch where his ashes fell. Then, right there in the driveway outside death's front door, undisguised, he put the gun to temple and said no more. My relatives didn't understand why I chose to celebrate his death, celebrate his life. I think that we need to celebrate each other's small victories, celebrate that life that we lead, celebrate all the good deeds done. I believe in honoring our loved ones by celebrating their passing, they're celebrating their life. So I'd never shared that before, but I thought this was the appropriate time. And unfortunately, his several relatives were very Catholic, and as Catholics, they feel free to judge this action. But I think that the gods smile at our little foibles and what strength we have, what weakness we have, mingled as they are. So I thank you, Marissa. I thank these fine people who join you in this mission to share thoughts, to share a heart, to share that celebrated life in the foolish, foolish ways that so many choose to spend it. Thank you, Marissa. You are a great soul.
Oh, thank you, Rick. And it was interesting what you said to start. Again, you have these opening liners to introduce your poems that I have to write down. You said, I didn't really get a vote. And I think that's really important to consider, the fact that we still are not listening to the children in our lives. We're not considering their opinions or their desires or their wants, because they're just children. And so it's very difficult when you have guns in the house and you're a child and you can't be heard or you can't be acknowledged and your vote doesn't count. The dismissiveness of feeling like children don't matter. And so I'm sorry that you had no vote as a child. And then you said, and I wrote these down because I want to write to them, okay? You said, we're all after the laughter. And I think that is important. And I do wonder when the laughter returns, when we're grieving gun violence or when children are grieving gun violence, when does that laughter come back? Does it ever? Right? And so it's a very interesting line. And I thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth, do you have any resolutions this year? What are your thoughts on grief, on grieving gun violence, all of that stuff? And then, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask you the same question, and then Blitz.
So when I was looking for things to put in my PowerPoint, the one common theme I kept seeing from survivors and grievers was that they wish people gave them more time. They needed more time to process, more time to grieve, and they felt like people were rushing them or thinking they should be over it or should be back to doing things. And everybody grieves in their own way. There's a very different way that people react. And especially if it's a death by gun violence, it's usually sudden and unexpected. which just adds another twist to the grief journey. And nobody's going to get out of it the easy way, but it's not like you can follow the path of a book and it's going to go through this phase, this phase, this phase, and I'm back in 12 weeks. That's just not the way grief works. So we really need to give people the time and space and listen so that they can get through what they need to get through. It's a bigger challenge, especially for kids, because it's not just grief, it's often their first big grief, but their whole world has collapsed. The world that they know, there's a before and after. It is not the same. So my resolutions for this year, I I tend to process and move forward by taking action. So I've supported some of the survivor groups from the big events. I'm really in love with the March for Our Lives kids. They sent a wrap this year of their victories, which really made me feel good. But I'm going to look for some groups closer to home. One of the things I found today and added to the PowerPoint is an exhibit that's happening in Boston right now that I had been unaware of. So I'd like to get more connected with some of the local people that are working on gun violence and making their way through grief and some collective action.
And as you find those events, Elizabeth, please let me know. We're going to start looking for grant money to begin to collaborate with other advocacy groups. Having, like, even though I don't live in Boston, right, either I can make a trip to Boston or I could have one of our advocates within American Graveyard go to Boston and have a booth or participate in whatever that event is, collaborating all of our groups. You know, if we can begin to kind of find everyone and partner with everyone and kind of build a cohesive network of people who are fighting for the same cause, if you will, or the same purpose, that's really one of the things I want to latch on to in this movement of American Graveyard. So yes, any of you who find those events, please let me know. And if you know ahead of time, and maybe you missed the Boston one this year, but hey, maybe we can find grant money to fund people going to Boston next year, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily immediate, but we want to find all these things. And so we're definitely looking to coordinate with other advocacy groups for sure. Mr. Speaker, do you have any resolutions this year? Do you have any advice for those who are perhaps grieving gun violence, or you don't have to answer either if you just want to kind of hang out too.
So hello everyone. I'm more of a resolve, not necessarily a resolution, but I'm just more along the lines of we just got to put more love into the atmosphere. It's not a resolution. It's more of a determination to continue to put more love out. What happens is we get caught up in something or focused on some minor things and we make a major and then somebody ends up getting hurt over it. Road rage or whatever ails us. We got to get away from that. Um, and for me, it's along the lines of helping these individuals who don't know they're hurting. And we got to put, at least from Mr. Speaker Inc., it's all about getting people to write more, not necessarily to speak, not necessarily to write books, not necessarily for any other alternative or any other reason except for getting it off their head and their mind and stop dealing with a lot of these issues through other means like violence. I'm of the belief that if we could have gotten to these military people who we have set up for destruction anyway. See, you've got to understand that getting help in the military is frowned upon, even though it's available. The underarching, the underpinnings that you don't get help because it's a sign of weakness, and nobody wants to follow a weak person. So individuals that wear those uniforms don't always get the help they need. Thus, they end up driving cars into crowds because they can't silence the voices, because they haven't been given the tools to silence the voices that are telling them to do bad things. But if they have been writing, getting some therapy, they had a better friend support group, many of these things would go away. And I'm letting you guys know that that's one of the underpinnings. This is not what you're seeing is the end result. I, as a soldier, can't get mental health help. I can, but I don't because it's a stigma in the military. When I don't, and then I get older and my resiliency starts to wane, then I start to do things that are unspeakable. And it may result in gun violence, but it ultimately just results in somebody getting hurt who had no idea, they just happened to be a victim. And so that's my goal. I'm trying to get to at-risk individuals across this world, wherever they are, and I'm trying to get them to write more. Uh, that's the goal for Mr. Speaker Inc. this year, because I think it's going to bring down violence. Over.
I love that. And thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for the point of view on that. And thank you for your service and for being part of this beautiful poetry community. You certainly add to the beauty of it. I'm inspired for this next year to do perhaps like a Friday night writing group or something like that, where folks can come to The Word is Right and do a writing workshop every week. And we'll figure out what the topics will be each week. But I think that and Elizabeth put in the chat, she says there's a whole trove of research on writing as a way to process trauma. We know this because we're writers. We're poets, we're performing artists. We know that writing is a great way to process trauma, and performing it is a great way to unpack it, and listening to someone perform it is a great way of having validation, and performing it over and over and over again is a way for us to heal. And so we know as writers and artists and performers that writing and performing is a form of healing for us. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And I think that if we can provide places that are perhaps off the grid, where people can come with a pen name and never have to show their ID at the door, if you will, to be able to write, perhaps we can provide places that are brave for folks to work through things so that they don't have to divulge that they're working through things in the spaces that still carry great stigma around help. I will say that I was over 40 years old when I confided in the first doctor of my whole life that I was struggling. And I wasn't sure what to do because I was very not in a good place. And she listened, and without judgment, she held space for me, and she told me I was okay, that I was not alone, that it would be okay, that she was there. And then she hugged me and she said she was going to help me. And it was the first time in my life that I had reached out for help. And I was in my 40s. So it's very hard. And I wasn't even in the military. So I can't even imagine. Right. So let's keep doing that. You're not alone. It does get better, and you can reach out to us, reach out to any one of us. Absolutely. Dial 988 if you are really in crisis. Uh, yeah, we definitely need to keep doing what we're doing and providing safe spaces, brave spaces for people to talk about what they need so that they can heal. Blitz, do you have any resolutions? Do you have any ideas or things you would like to talk about when we're discussing grieving gun violence today?
I think, like Mr. Speaker was stating about and I like how y'all were stating about time, because in writing, I feel like writing is a way to help with the healing process. And because that's how I channel my anger, is by writing. I mean, I would even suggest, even if you're not a poet, writing can clear your thought process. It's it's pretty much the metaphorical way of counting to 10 before you react and do something impulsive that could affect and change your life entirely. So I feel like the writing is the equivalency of counting to 10. And it can help you think things through before you do something irrational. And like you said, not even a gun with like road rage. It's the way to have a cooler head to prevail. And that's one of the things I would very much say can help, is if you just can collect your thoughts more. Don't let the moment get to you, because reactionary can always cause more trouble than just stepping back. Try to assess the situation before you react. That would be that would be my train of thought on it.
And I love that. It's like counting to 10 before you act. Mr. Speaker said, stop focusing on the minor things that make major things happen, right? Like road rage. It's so true. I mean, I don't know how it is where y'all live, but where I live in Albuquerque, road rage is a huge issue. It's a huge problem. We have lost people who were shot and killed on the highway. Lily Garcia I believe she was 5 years old. Her father in his truck got into an incident with another vehicle. The other vehicle fired upon the truck on the interstate, struck and killed the young child. And so, we really need to consider our actions and our reactions to things so that we're not putting lives at risk. Certainly, this child did not uh, deserve to lose her life so soon, and certainly the family did not deserve to bury their child over anything. Welcome, Shaki G is entering the room. Welcome, Shaki. Good to have you. All right, so I'm going to read this poem that I wrote as it's an ekphrastic poem, and it is to Jane's spoken words piece in the American Graveyard art book. This is the image that Jane's spoken word has. It is a tree that is bare with just branches, and it has a tombstone under the tree with a setting sun in the back. It's a drawing. There's a black crow on the tree branch, and rising up above the tree branches is a popping red mylar heart balloon. And this image was just very striking to me when she had posted it, and I had asked her to submit it for American Graveyard, and she did. And so this is a poem that came out of Jane's art contribution. There is only so much healing a red mylar heart balloon can give. Teddy bears can weather the weather for years before they transform into something else. Candles blow dark at the end of their time. Ribbon shears and shreds with the wind and sun until the color is unrecognizable and the purpose all but forgotten. Trees are supposed to bloom again every year, regardless of correspondence for the opposite. There is a man who has dedicated his life to creating white crosses for every child lost to mass shooting gun violence at school. He probably never thought he'd be so busy. Trees are still the unwilling accomplice to wear out our grief on their limbs, painted with the innocent names martyred for the cause, trying to pry open the crying eyes of those blinded by light refracted from gunshots. Trees are supposed to regrow. So many crosses regrow, regenerate, pop up in everyone's neighborhood, in every child's school, in every parent's nightmare. Crosses once cut from the tree begin to die too, degrade into death and dust to join the name stained on its face. There is only so much healing a red mylar heart balloon can give. And I am tired of burying the innocent beneath a denial system so sick, I fear there is no cure. And that's that piece. All right, I will turn it over to Elizabeth. If you would like to share screen, my friend, go over your lovely presentation, and then we will go around and see if anyone has any comments on Elizabeth's contribution today, and then close out with the YouTube video for the end. If anyone who has not read a poem would like to read a poem, you're welcome to do that as well.
All right, I turned off my video. Bring up PowerPoint. So I think I'm going to go ahead and, okay. Let's see if we can do this. You can see that, right? All right.
Yes.
Resolutions and grieving gun violence. So how often are we grieving? Every 11 minutes. We pop out of this for a minute just to show you a quick video from the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence that shows just the prevalence of what we're talking about here. And this is just what really struck me. That's 132 people die from gun violence every 24 hours. That's every day, people. So how often are we grieving? This is what the data says about gun deaths in the US. This is from Pew Research. And it shows, this is the numbers are from 2021. The percent of US gun deaths by type. It's about 54% suicide, 43% murder. These are all gun deaths, so they're all sudden, largely unexpected. And that makes them a more complicated grief. I don't know if you can read this. It was just to show sort of the ebb and flow. This is the Gun Violence Archive using, I believe, CDC data, a 10-year review of the numbers for deaths by gun violence. What are we grieving? Okay, how do I get this out of here? I changed my view somewhere?
So, so are you wanting to move to a different slide or move to a different tab?
I'm wanting to be able to read the whole slide, and my view of the people in the room is in the way.
Oh, okay. So if you hover your mouse over where the people are, there should be like a little icon that'll let you shrink it into super small, or you can also drag it usually, but try to shrink it. You can shrink it smaller, just the people.
Yeah, I got it. All right.
All right.
So what are we grieving? It's not just the people that die, although, we are grieving for them, but many more people are shot and survive, are shot at, but not injured, are witnesses, our family, our friends, are impacted even though they are not the person who died. Many experience firearm violence in other ways, living in communities that have high levels of violence, losing loved ones to firearm violence, or just being fearful, just grieving for a way of life when it changes the way that you live, because you're afraid to attend events, to walk in your neighborhoods, to send a child to school. This is also from the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence. These are the kinds of grieving that is associated with gun violence. Like Marissa, I also focused on the children, because for each adult killed, there are often multiple children who are affected. The quotes I'm going to give you come from an article, Forgotten Children, which is part of a series from Mindsight News. It came out of New Orleans. And the example that they use as the header to pull you into this story is one adult was shot, the other adult was the shooter. Between them, there were 8 children affected. So the children who are left behind, and in this country, bereaved children disproportionately come from lower income and from communities of color. One of the reasons this story came out of New Orleans has a very sadly high incident of violence, so that in 2023, shootings occurred on average once a day, an average of 11 murders a month. And no one knows exactly how many grieving children are left behind, because there's no one who is tracking, identifying, and working on that problem. The death of a parent is one of the most traumatic and stressful events. It's not only the loss of a parent, it's the loss of a whole world. So one of the things that this project is working on is how to come together to work on this issue for these children. If the loss is sudden, that gun violence deaths are, the ramifications are deeper still, whether the cause was suicide, an accident, a shooting, or unexpected illness. For at least 7 years after a parent's sudden death, children have higher rates of depression, post-traumatic stress, suicidal ideation. And deaths due to gun violence leave an aftermath of trauma and a sense of stigma. So with the amount of gun violence that we see and the amount of children that are affected, they're trying to come up with effective interventions. Grieving is a natural process, but children need to process their grief in a supportive environment. So this research team are looking at rates of prolonged grief disorder and interventions that can successfully help these kids. And there's a trauma and grief center in New Orleans. There's a trauma and grief center for kids from the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And the philosophy from the New Orleans Center, grief is a reaction to the love they have for the person. Our goal is not to get rid of the grief, but to give them tools to cope with the grief over time. And that's what we're really talking about here, is what are the tools that we can give people in addition to granting them time? And here's the one tool. This is the show that is in Boston. This is actually a Christian Science Monitor article published yesterday. We're going to switch now to the mothers of people who died in gun violence. And this is talking about the Gun Violence Memorial Project, a national traveling exhibit from Purpose Over Pain that collects personal objects and takes them traveling around cities in a display so that you can come and gather and look at these real people and share the pain and your stories and come together in a group that's focused on resilience. So Marissa, Purpose Over Pain out of Chicago, maybe one group that we want to be talking to. This traveling exhibit was inspired actually by the founders visiting the Civil Rights Memorial in the South. Purpose Over Pain aims to facilitate healing by offering lifelines to those in the depths of grief. So the organization gives concrete assistance, like raising money for funerals, mentoring youth, intervention for at-risk people, and support for people who are going through traumatic losses. And the subheading of the story, which is really what drove me to it, was it's a story focused on resilience. That is basically the successful resolution of grief, right? That's what we want to be the happy ending. You're going to have a new normal because it's never going to be the same, but focused on resilience to help us process through the trauma and get to the other side in a more positive way, rather than leading towards causing more trauma. Finding meaning in loss is critical for loved ones dealing with the aftermath of gun violence. So sometimes that resilience comes through activisms. And personally, I think that's been true in my life. That's been true in a lot of ways. And it's part of what draws me to groups like March for Our Lives, which came out of the Parkland shootings. There are groups that have come out of a lot of these events, and groups that actually exist to, I'm showing with my hands and I turned off my video, that exist to facilitate bringing all these people together so that we can help those who are feeling this trauma immediately. There's another project that caught my eye. It's Dear Future Survivor. It was pulled together in December 2022 on the 10th anniversary of the Sandy Hook shootings. So ABC News went to survivors of gun violence events and asked them to write a letter to future survivors. Since we know, sadly, there will be future events, what do you wish you knew then? What can you say to future survivors? And the emphasis was to find hope along with the grief. So I'm just going to read you a couple of these that I selected. I highly recommend looking this up. If you Google it, it will come up, Dear Future Survivor. So this is from Jackie Hegarty, who's a survivor of the Sandy Hook shooting. Trauma can't disappear, but it can be managed. You're entitled to scream, cry, break down, mourn, and grieve. It's a part of healing. No one deserves to live their life feeling like they have to stay silent. If you're struggling, reach out to people. Your family, your friends, anyone who you trust is there to support you every step of the way. This is from Jasmine Cazares. When she was 17, her 9-year-old sister Jackie was killed in Uvalde. One of the hardest things you need to know about losing someone to a mass shooting is that you might not get to say goodbye. You need to remember that they loved you no matter what. No matter how many fights you had, or if you didn't say I love you enough, they know you did. Life changes when somebody dies, and your view of the world shifts. You can see the best and the worst of people. You'll never be the same, but you'll learn to live with this. I think that's especially important when we're talking about gun violence grieving, is when it comes suddenly and out of nowhere. You have people struggling with that they didn't get to say a goodbye, they didn't get to have a resolution. And it brings up a lot of feelings for survivors and a lot of guilt. This is from Zoe Touré, a survivor of the shooting at the Oxford High School in Michigan. I wish someone would have told me to look for the small moments of happiness in between the grief, because they are lasting and you'll remember them forever. And I think it's important that we remember to focus on the moments of joy in between the grief. You're entitled to feel joy between the grief. It's okay. It's not disloyal. It doesn't mean you're forgetting. It means that the human spirit in you is still trying to move in the world as you need to move on. And that's what I had. And there were no interruptions, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions. Let me see if I can now come back to my Zoom, which I shrank.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? I guess we'll kind of maybe go in order, the order of appearance, I suppose. Rick, do you have um, any reactions or feedback or anything like that? And Elizabeth, we certainly, if you want, you can stop sharing if you want. And if Rick wants you to pull up a slide again, we can always go back to that.
I am actually trying to stop sharing and can't find how. So if you want to stop me sharing, that would be cool.
Let me see if I can figure this out. Usually at the top of your screen, it'll have a little like stop sharing button, or you could always go back to
Oh,
stop
wait,
sharing for just
here we
I
go.
got it for you. I have the power.
I did such a good
All
job
right.
shrinking my Zoom window. I couldn't find it again, but thank you.
Okay, no, you're so welcome. It's there's a lot of technology, right? I mean, I think since COVID, everyone kind of grants everyone a little bit of grace when it comes to technology these days. But I will turn it over to Rick, and then we'll see if Mr. Speaker has anything, and then Blitz, if you would like to chime in.
I just want to say, Elizabeth, beautifully done. You assembled a group of resources that are, you know, it's a deep, dark subject, but you brought some very thoughtful responses to it. And I thought it was a very enriching tour that you gave us of some very thoughtful reactions to this whole situation. It's how does one address it? How does one cope? The idea that people who've been through it are giving the gift of their insight to future victims. Wonderful. You took a very difficult and, unbeautiful situation and you brought intelligence and wonderful resources to it. Thank you so much for what you've done.
Mr. Speaker, did you have anything to chime in or add to Elizabeth's presentation on grieving gun violence?
Yes. So it was very, very well put together. I loved it. I especially was drawn to the fact that she mentioned resiliency, because resiliency is one of the things the U.S. military is trying to build in personnel to help us deal and cope with this. Uh, and I'm reflecting on a poem to do because she had me waffling between two. But one thing I want us to discuss or think about is the word loss. Um, Loss kind of hints toward ownership, and we're not the owners of other people. Thus, it's a transition. It may be untimely, unexpected, unwanted, but you can't lose something you don't own. Literally, I mean, in a figuratively, I'm just trying to soften the blows of, and I love that purpose over pain. That's just a great organization. Sounds great. I'm just trying to soften it in the sense that we didn't bring anybody here. I know we birth people. Some women birth people, but what I'm saying is we're not the controllers of other people's lives technically, and thus, there's a divine being that decides the start and the end of all life, and we got to remember that. And so that purpose over pain gets you back to the point of understanding that because we didn't design this world, we didn't determine who was going to be here. Uh, we got to be careful acting like we are that we did, because we did not. And I'm saying it from the perspective of a loss. If I lose money, I earned it. It was mine. I got that. I I can't lose a person I don't own. They may transition, but once you meet a spirit, you always know that spirit. Once you meet a heart, you will always know their heart. You just may not see them again until you get to heaven or what have you, but they just transitioned earlier. That's all over.
I like that he says over, right? It reminds me a little bit of Stranger Things, the movie where the kids are like using the walkie-talkies, and he says, "You're supposed to say over when you're done. Over." Just to inflect a little humor, right? We try to inflect these little humor points throughout the podcast because it's a very intense, a very deep topic. But I appreciate that from you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. All right, Blitz, do you have any thoughts or reactions to the PowerPoint on grief? And he may have stepped away, or who knows. A couple things that I love. So, just to reiterate, the two organizations that Elizabeth highlighted, March for Our Lives. I did try to tag them in this live, but when I tried to tag them, it didn't pull up anything. So, I'll have to do some research online to follow their page or whatever to perhaps be able to tag them in future events if we're, mentioning them. I do like to share promotional things with organizations as we are mentioning them on this podcast. The other one is Purpose Over Pain. Again, I tried to tag them in this live video and it didn't pull anything up. So we'll do research to be able to tag them in the future when we are discussing them. But they are out of Chicago. And it's true, we definitely want to be collaborating with these organizations. Um, it was startling to me to learn that we grieve every 11 minutes. And so I wanted to know how many times a day do we grieve? And there's 131 times a day that we grieve as human beings. I think that probably increases as we get older because we just incur more loss in our memory bank as adults as we get older. 5 people die every hour from gun violence. This is a stifling statistic. In the 2 hours that we will have been here, 10 people on average will have died from gun violence. So it is it's definitely something that we need to continue to take head on. And another thing that sat really heavy on my heart when Elizabeth was doing her PowerPoint, especially as a mom, is that gun deaths are usually sudden deaths, and sudden deaths lead to complicated grief. Because as a someone who struggles with wanting to be here sometimes, we forget the impact of those we leave behind, and someone who is a survivor of gun violence, and someone who has lost loved ones to suicide and gun violence. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and I carry a lot of that grief. And so, 7 years after a parent's death, kids are still at risk of dying from suicide. Um, I would never want anything to happen to my kids, but I know that the struggle to stay alive supersedes oftentimes the consideration of how those around you will continue. And so I will just reaffirm that if you are in crisis, if you are struggling, please talk to someone. Call 988, reach out, let's talk about it.org. Like, there's so many resources now. Talk to your doctor, talk to your priest, talk to your, poet friends. If you can't talk to your family and friends, go to find someone to talk to. Go to an open mic, go to a poetry room online, go write it down. Even if you burn the paper afterwards, write it down. You matter. Start this step towards healing, because you can unpack it. You don't have to carry it your whole life. You can put it on paper and you can unpack it. You can talk about it with other people who've been through grief. I remember when Crystal died, the church I grew up in was having a grief group, and I'd never been to a grief group. I've been to Al-Anon meetings and military family support stuff, and I've been to lots of other that kind of support, but never anything that was focused on my loss and my healing. And I went with a woman who wound up becoming one of my best friends because she lost her mother. And I learned a lot of things that I didn't know about grief and about my healing and my strength and my resiliency that I didn't know. Um, and so I think that so far I've won all of the 44 years of my life. I've won every single day. And I think that moving forward gives me strength and power to win tomorrow and the next day. And I know that it gives me the ability to listen to my children when they need help, that I can affirm them when they reach out for help and hold that space so that they can have a vote, Rick, so that their voice matters, that they're not just children. They can't just get over it. I don't want to cry. I don't want to hear that. I embrace the emotions and hold the space when they feel like they are uh, losing themselves. So there's a lot of things that come with healing that are much larger than just your one pain for this one thing. You have this one thing, this one pain 131 times a day. And in the 2 hours of this broadcast, 10 families are going to have this one pain 131 times every day for the rest of their life. So let's keep going with what we're doing. Before we move on to the final YouTube clip, does anyone have anything else that they would like to add today?
I put the link to the organization Purpose Over Pain in the chat. So if you want to share that, you certainly can.
Okay, this is purpose dash over dash pain.org/about. So definitely go. You could probably just Google Purpose Over Pain organization and find it as well. But we will reach out to them and see if they would like to collaborate on something down the road. Mr. Speaker has a poem, so I will go ahead and turn the mic over to him.
Well, thank you very much. It's called Covered. Covered. As a result of leading soldiers through 4 combat tours, witnessing the darkest side of humanity, and dealing with dashes past death's doorstep daily, I realized that I was covered in grief. Being covered in grief has caused me to make peace with my inner demons in order to find relief. What is not said? Daily I walk with the dead. They will not leave me alone. Sometimes grief even speaks. It tries to cover me and smother me. It has even tried to chase me into traffic, over bridges, toward abuse, into pits of despair. My grief wants me to think it is everywhere. I am not trying to alter your belief, but I have never seen good grief. As a result of handling way too many body bags, notifying numerous families of death of loved ones, and presenting several flags to spouses, I now understand why PTSD stalks me, walks with me, talks to me, and tells me it has no equal. See, I really do see dead people. People who would be dead without the military, and people who are dead because of the military. I smile through layers, cry through prayers, because this part of the military has no fanfare. I now know you cannot repay evil with evil because that just makes recovery too steep. You will never obtain peace. So I stand here still trying to find relief from this gloomy covering of grief in peace.
That line, I have never seen good grief. Um, that is a poignant line. I think that should be the writing prompt for this month. Good grief. I think that that's a very interesting concept. But I thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and for your service as well. As always, y'all can follow us at redorgreenbooks.com, red READ. You can read about the anthology. You can get the copy of the book with everyone. There's between the two books. Check this out. Between the two books, there are 76 contributors, 26 states, and 8 countries between these two books, and it's an incredible outpouring of experiences and lives lived. So you can support us there. We'll go to this YouTube video, and then I'll have everyone kind of plug where you can find them and follow them if you're watching online, so that you can be part of what these beautiful people are doing. Let me set the stage for you on this clip here. This is the YouTube page from Shared Humanity. It is hosted by Nelda Marquez Green, and she's an activist and resident at Yale School of Public Health. She does this podcast, and she's talking. Her guest on this podcast is Tara Donnelly, who is a survivor and advocate for an end to gun violence. In February of 2005, Tara's dad was shot and killed at their jewelry store. He died immediately, and then the mother was shot and killed, and she died as first responders were trying to save her life. Together, they were shot 11 times total. I'll give you the little backstory because I went and I cut up the video so that because it's a 33-minute video. I don't want to watch it for 33 minutes, so we don't have the time today for that. But essentially, this was an armed robbery by a young man who had a drug addiction, who stole a gun that was not secured in a residence. He was paroled in California, and he traveled across the country to Connecticut. He had committed crimes in New York and other places around New England, but ultimately had shot and killed her parents in Connecticut, and she was a child. And her brother was a few years older than her. And so when she became an adult and a parent, she proposed Ethan's Law, which in Connecticut is where if you own a gun, it must be locked up. It must be securely and safely stored. And so she's working on trying to expand Ethan's Law. And so that's how that goes. She is an advocate with GV Angels. G as in Georgia, V as in Victory Angels, which is an organization that reaches out to families affected by gun violence to see what their needs and wants are, and you can sign up to help them. There. All right. So let me go ahead and I'll share screen and we'll go into this. The first couple minutes is the introduction. Then she's going to explain a little bit about their program. She's going to talk a little bit about how her grief has evolved. She's going to talk a little bit about Ethan's Law and advocacy, and then about the children affected by gun violence. And then she's going to end by discussing how art is healing through the grief process. All right, let me go ahead and share screen.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so honored to be here and chat with you. And I think before we jump into anything, I think it's important to name that we're able to have this conversation because of what I think is a beautiful gift that you gave me when we were chatting about doing this episode. And I said, I don't know how or in what capacity I could share my story and what I've been through when speaking to you and all you have endured. And you very gracefully responded, both things can be true, that you can endure your own loss and speak about it and not be able to fathom, what life is like in your shoes. So I just want to thank you for that. And also add, in your words that you said we need to share all of these stories and not everyone's experience is different, but there's so many of us who have been and continue to be impacted by gun violence. So I just wanted to thank you for that and the opportunity to do that and share my story.
So let's talk a little bit about that because that comes up almost every single time.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a hierarchy of grief or pain or story that seems to live in the gun violence prevention space.
Yeah.
That almost keeps us from talking to one another because no one wants to offend or hurt the other person. I lost a 6-year-old. Who did you lose?
I lost my mother and father on the same day in the same incident. It was February 2nd, 2005. We had a family jewelry store in Fairfield, Connecticut, and they were closing down the shop for the night. They were two of the kindest, they were simple, just genuinely good people. And they were shutting down the store for the night, and a young man walked in telling my dad he was looking to purchase an engagement ring. And as he got closer to the counter, he instead pulled out a gun. And he shot my dad. My dad died immediately, we believe. And my mom turned to call the police, and she was shot. Combined, they were shot 11 times. And my dad died immediately, and my mom died as paramedics were working on her.
How would you explain parts of the experience you feel comfortable sharing to someone who may not have lived a gun violence incident?
It's a difficult question. There's so many elements and aspects of it. I think that we even try to understand ourselves as survivors and explaining to someone else. I think I would say it's something and a grief that is with you always. It's certainly not something that you ever get over, but it also evolves, the response to it and the grief, and it changes because I'm a very different person than I was, nearly 20 years ago, and I miss them in very different ways than I did back then. It's so hard to try and encompass, all of the multifaceted aspects of it that come with it, particularly, just the grief of having lost one parent and both parents, and the trauma aspect of it. And although not nearly as publicized as Sandy Hook, but having people that you love the most on the front page of the paper every day. There's so much that goes with it. And now, you know, that it's not in the headlines anymore, trying to navigate that with my kids. It's with you for the rest of your life, is I guess what I would say to someone is although, you know, the average person only sees your particular story in the headlines for so long, it's with the people impacted, the people who are impacted, it's with them forever.
And that you answered until now. I'm going to ask you how your grief has evolved from 20 years until now. Because people who might not know might say, it's been 20 years, right? And
Yeah.
how do you answer that?
I used to say that. I remember when they first passed away, getting cards from so many people. And I remember one of them was from someone I didn't know, but they had said they had lost their dad 15 years ago. And I remember reading it being like, you know, not understanding that that's it. Like I said, it's with you forever. My grief now has evolved, you know, as my life has evolved. Right now, I'm a parent without parents, and that's very different than, you know, when I was a very recent college graduate. When the incident happened, I had just moved out of their house. I had just graduated college. I was living at home, just moved to my first apartment in New York City, started working. It was, you know, I was set up for what I viewed to be the most exciting time of my life, and this happened. So those first years were just trying to get by and you know, staying above water. You know, I wasn't someone who jumped right into advocacy. I was just trying to survive and navigate and get up. And today my grief is different. It's, you know, navigating life with two kids without my mom and dad here, and trying to honor their memory and keep them alive through stories, and trying to have them play some role in the lives of my kids by telling them about them. It's a lot. It's difficult. It's very difficult.
And I would imagine that you were keeping the memory of your mom and dad alive for your children, and you're doing activism, and you're doing your work, you're doing so many different parts of your life, and also trying to put one foot in front of the other every single day. And that doesn't ever change.
Right. It doesn't. It's, yeah, it's something you deal with for the rest of your life. And I think also the older I get, I think the magnitude of what I experienced becomes more clear to me. I think because I was technically out of college and living on my own, I was like, well, I was an adult. And now looking back, I realize, you know, and looking at, I'll say kids who recently graduated college, you know, it's like, they're not really adults, you know, and it's just, I realized the severity of what that experience was, and trying to have a lot more grace with myself, and what the healing journey looks like, because a lot of times you don't get to dictate where you are, you know.
That's very true.
I'm getting all my child to a 20th to all home
Story that you can share about why the expansion of Ethan's Law. So tell us first a little bit about Ethan's Law, and then tell us about the expansion and the steps that got you there.
Sure. So Ethan's Law, it's very simple in concept. If you own a gun and you're not in proximity of it, it has to be locked up and secured so that someone who should not have access to the gun doesn't get access. And in Ethan's Law, it's specifically for minors. And it is relevant to me because the young man who killed my mom and dad had a drug addiction, and he fueled that addiction for over 10 years by way of committing petty crimes. So he stole cars and broke into homes, and he broke into a home in Greenwich, Connecticut in December of 2004, and he opened the drawer to a nightstand, presumably looking for valuables, and he got a gun. And that changed the trajectory of so many lives, and mine included. A few weeks after obtaining the gun, which he legally could not purchase because of his criminal record for those petty crimes. He had been in and out of jail. He was actually on parole in California and made his way to Connecticut. A few weeks after he obtained the gun, he first robbed a jewelry store in Long Island, and that jeweler was killed. And a few weeks after that, he came into my mom and dad's store. So it's hard for me to think about how different my life would be if that gun had just been locked up. And in lobbying for the expansion of Ethan's Law, I made a phone call to the man whose house was broken into, whose gun was stolen, and ultimately whose gun killed my mom and dad.
You made a phone call to the owner
of
the gun that was used, not the person who committed the crime, but the owner of the gun that was stolen.
I wanted to know how, what transpired after his gun was stolen. I wanted to know how it impacted him, and I was hopeful that he might testify. I know that, lobbying up in Hartford, it can be very vocal on both ends,
Right.
And I thought that, of course, I could share my story, but I thought with fellow gun owners, his voice might carry more weight than my own. And I was hopeful that he might be willing to speak about that. So when I did have the phone call with him, the first thing he said was, "I'm so sorry." And he said, "What happened haunts me every day." And I went into that phone call very, thinking very much about what I was going to say and explain why it mattered to me. And I wasn't expecting an apology. And it sort of just knocked the wind out of me for a minute, because it wasn't an apology I knew that I needed. And it wasn't lost on me that it has impacted him. And I think that matters. And I think other gun owners need to know that, it's not a matter of taking your firearms away. It's ensuring that they don't get into the hands of the wrong person, whether it be a child, whether it be someone, who's not in the right mental state to have access to a gun, or a criminal who shouldn't have a gun, because it's a very small margin of people who are not responsible with their guns, but the results are catastrophic. And it's such a simple step.
It's a small number of people who do the wrong thing, but every single one of us is part of the ecosystem in charge of doing the right thing.
Right. Exactly. And
First,
local law worked 3, and just hitting the pavement down in DC, sitting down with any legislator willing to talk to us and really trying to find common ground. Because I think the more conversations you have, you realize the less divisive it is. It's just about securing guns, keeping them out of the wrong hands. And, it's hard to be opposed to that, even among gun owners, and most gun owners already practice safe storage. So a lot of my advocacy is specifically around safe storage, but gun violence is a multifaceted epidemic, and there's so many avenues and so many elements of it to touch upon. So I wish there was one law that could be passed that would end this epidemic overnight, but obviously that's not the case. So
it takes all hands on deck.
It does.
So many. And what would you
need to
us about?
of my kid that we know through that there are over 120 children locally who know the loss of gun violence. And it's predominantly children who have lost a parent, and it's predominantly fathers. And just knowing that there's that many young children who know that loss.
I want to be clear that people are actually understanding what you are saying. You're saying you have started an initiative called GV Angels, and you have easily identified 120 children in one city in Connecticut alone
Mhm.
who know the pain of losing someone to gun violence, and it's usually a father,
Mhm.
and that's in one city.
That's in one city. Yes.
So we should sit with that for a second
should.
because the numbers
Yes.
are pretty staggering. And you're
Yes.
right.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
shouldn't grow, but we
Yeah.
know that they will. Tara, if
Uh,
you can nominate you, when you started this, said a little bit about your family, and I know you have a brother.
Mhm.
A brother who was 2 years older than you.
Mhm.
Is 2 years older than you. How is your brother?
He's great. He's great. He works here.
That's right. He
He's a
works
colleague
here.
of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, we're both on very similar and at the same time individual grief journeys.
That's right.
It's something we both experienced, and sometimes navigate the same way, and some ways navigate very differently.
And he also adds another layer to how he manages his grief and processes, things that happen, and that's through art.
Mhm.
And when we were doing one of our calls in preparation for this, you said, my brother wrote some songs.
Mhm.
And I spent quite a bit of time listening to his music.
Mhm.
The band is the Alternate Roots.
Mhm.
And I was just floored. I was floored by the sensitivity, by the artistry,
Mhm.
by the beauty and the pain all captured in lyric and in music. And I know the Dean Megan Rennie, who runs this whole shop here at the Yale School of Public Health, she's also interested in the intersection of using art as a way of processing, healing, managing a gun violence and gun violence loss. And if it's okay with you, there's one song in particular called Somewhere in America.
Mhm.
And I'd just like to read some of the lyrics. Is that all right? And this is from the Heart of Eric Donnelly, sung by the band. And he is a colleague of ours here at Yale. And the last stanza of his song, Somewhere in America, speaks to where he is now, having a child of his own. He has two children of his own
He had
now.
one at the time, but yes.
But he only had one at the time of this song, and just where he is. And that stanza, it reads like this: the years have been kind. Sorry, guys, this is gonna be rough. Okay, so this is the stanza, and I'm just gonna read it as he wrote it. The years have been kind. I've got a son now of my own. When I think of what I'll tell him, what happened to you, I still don't know. That the world's a much safer place. That kind of danger you won't ever have to face. And I pray he lives to see that day. No idea what I'm going to say. Somewhere in America, the phone is about to ring. And nothing can prepare you for the news it's going to bring. And all this time we've been waiting, time spent debating, somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. Somewhere in America. Your brother, Eric Donnelly, using his art to put into music the experience of so many of us, right? The experience that happens over 100 times, almost 120 times a day, that somewhere in America, a phone is going to ring and you'll never be prepared for the news on the other end. And that's why I try really hard through this podcast and also in all of my work to remind survivors that there is no hierarchy, that there is no rank order, that we are in this together in pain and in finding solutions, and hopefully in teaching others what they can do to take action and also have hope through these stories that you, like yours, that you have generously shared with our audience. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much.
All right. So you can see why now I chose that interview to talk today. And we consider sometimes gun violence as an isolated event. Sometimes perhaps we may think that it only affects the shooter and the victim, but the ripple effects of the loss of loved ones is huge, right? And hang on one sec. So, Tara said she talks about the fact she's parenting without parents and how hard that must be, right? And she keeps them alive through telling their stories. But if you think about it, not only is she parenting without parents, but her kids don't get to have grandkids or grandparents. And so the loss isn't just to her for the loss of her parents, it's also a loss to her children. And of course, the children of her brother as well, that they don't have their grandparents. And so the ripple effect of the lessons and the love and the experiences and the support and the family and all those things that you would surround a child with, to love and support them, are just gone and taken so frivolously and so quickly and so traumatically, and having the being an opportunist and just being able to steal a gun that wasn't locked up, right? And so um the damage is so much more than the shooter and the victim. It is so much bigger, and it's generational trauma, right? um and then another thing she said, a couple of things she said, about the apology. I don't know what she was thinking when she called him, what was running through her mind. She didn't really get into that too much, but I'm assuming she wanted to get some sort of retribution or some sort of understanding. Um, but she said that he apologized. It haunts him. I hope it haunts him. I hope it haunts the gun owners who are not securing their weapons, securing their guns, because not just did this gun shoot and kill her parents, it was used in other crimes. So I do hope that this person thinks about this loss every day of the rest of their life. I don't wish them ill and I don't necessarily wish them pain, but I do hope they carry the memory and reflect on it for the rest of their life. And she said that she knows 120 kids locally in Connecticut. Y'all, in her little town. I don't know if it's little, but it can't be that big. It's Connecticut. In her town, in her city in Connecticut, she knows 120 kids who know loss from gun violence, and most of them are father figures. So it's just an incredible it was an incredible interview. I was really glad to show you. And I think the lyrics by Alternate Roots, which is her brother's band, Right Somewhere in America, I think that is a great writing prompt. If you're looking for something to write to that. Make sure you credit the alternate roots. Um, Alternative. Oh man, I wrote it down wrong. But anyways, go back and watch it. You can find this video on YouTube. It is. Let me hit the back button. It is Shared Humanity '07, Somewhere in America, Gun Violence and Grief 20 Years Later, by the Yale School of Public Health. It is on on YouTube. It is a public podcast, so please go and watch and support. Rick, what are some of your takeaways from this interview? And then we will just plug where people can find you, follow you, all that good stuff, and we'll end for today after Elizabeth. You're muted again, my friend.
The heartache that she shared. And it's, you know, it's so overwhelming, but at the same time, she shows a resilience and a determination to make something good come from it. And that, I think, is the best we can ask of each other when we go through something that is horrific. That if we can learn from it, if we can make good come from it, then we are no longer the victim of it. We have taken this and made it a gain for us. And clearly, she's not just helping her own immediate family, she's helping the larger community. And that's a wonderful thing. And given, the terrible price she had to pay to get to that place, as true as that is, this woman has done heroic service for her community. Thank you for sharing.
And she's done a lot of advocacy, right? She's taken on lawmakers. She's taken this Capitol Hill. Let's go, right? Because really, change can start in the home, but it doesn't. And we know this. And so we have to now have mandates because humans have to be regulated. So, these are things. These are all the things. But I definitely, I'm going to reach out to both the podcast host as well as her guest. And this was dated as of 1 month ago. So this is very recent. This is a recent posting on YouTube. We're not stopping. Let's go. And Elizabeth, I know that this is so close to your heart, and it's a lot of what you were talking about in your slides as well. So I'll turn that over to you, and then y'all can plug where people can find you, follow you, all the good stuff.
Yeah, I am going to take as a prompt that somewhere in America the phone's about to ring. But when she talks about there is no hierarchy, something we barely touched on today was just the survivor's guilt, the people who have trouble processing their grief because they don't feel entitled to it because they walked away when others did not. One of the survivors in the Dear letters talked about feeling guilty hugging her parents when there were kids who couldn't hug their parents or parents who no longer had their children. So I thought that was really useful for that. In terms of where to find me, if you are in the Boston area, I have a poem coming out in Ibbotson Street, and there will be a reading. Usually those are in Somerville and live and in person. Don't have a date yet, but I will post it when I can. I have 2 poems coming out in a Grateful Dead anthology. That should be a lot of fun. That'll be an online launch, hopefully with a soundtrack. Again, I don't have a date yet. I haven't gotten my copy yet, but that is in process. And Vagabond Press came up with a lunar collection. They pulled poems from other anthologies from Vagabond Press, which is part of the Lunar Codex and will be launched to the moon sometime in February. So sometime in February, there will be a virtual reading for the Vagabond Lunar Codex. I don't have dates yet, but I will. So those are all forthcoming in the mix. And my lunar collection poem is actually a Why We March for Our Lives. It's a gun violence poem. So I will be sending that to the moon in February.
I love that, and congratulations with all that wonderful stuff. I do have a Rolling Stones tribute poem, so I love that you're doing some Grateful Dead stuff. Let's go. It's a lot of fun. The healing, artwork, whether it's music, painting, drawing, sketching, sculpting, pottery, writing, speaking, performing, those are all incredibly healing tools. And so I'm so glad that you are continuing to do that. And I wish you all the greatest success in the world on those. And then, of course, we have volume 2 of American Graveyard coming out. The calls go until January 15th. So all of the information is on our website for that. Rick, where can people find you, follow you, all that good stuff?
The best place is to go to newmercurymedia.com. You can see my cartoons, my writing, my poetry, my video projects. I produce a show called Poets of the East, interviewing up to over 200 poets from across the globe. And you can find my latest book at the very finest publisher we know. That, of course, is Red and Green Books. So please buy my book, Stone Poetry, through the good offices of Miss Marissa Prada, woman extraordinaire, poet, artist, publisher. I can't say enough good things about her. Contact that woman, buy that book. It's just one of a plethora of fine poets.
Thank you, Rick, so much. Your book is amazing, y'all. It is a big book. It's got some of his drawings and graphics in there. It's a lot of fun. You definitely would not be at all disappointed with his book. If you're looking for the gift for anyone, you can't shop for someone, get them this book. It is a wonderful book. It's a wild ride. It is so much fun, and it was a lot of fun to put together too, and to read and go through. So it's a great book. All right, so thank you all so much. As always, you can find us. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow everywhere. Red or greenbooks.com. Red, READ. The word is right, WRITE. And coming soon, Red or Green Films. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, Poetry and Some Prada. You can also find me at Facebook, Marissa Prada. Thank you all so very much. We will get this uploaded to YouTube. We'll be able to access it. If you could please like, share, subscribe, and follow, that would help us all out. Next month, we will be back in February, and we will be covering, our topic will be calling 911 and meeting Al Sharpton. You know what? I'm going to reach out to Al Sharpton, see if he wants to come on our pod. You know, the answer is no until you ask. So I'm going to just see if that beautiful man wants to come on our show and maybe talk about all that has happened and his advocacy work around gun violence, especially for disparaged communities and communities of color that he is supporting in his unwavering efforts to bring attention to those events. But peace and blessings. Thank you all so very much for all your hard work. Elizabeth, thank you for your spreadsheet, and Rick for your time and your experience. Thank you so much, James, Mr. Speaker Sears, and Blitz the Poet for joining us today as well. I will see you all next month. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Marissa.
You're welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks. Take care.